I'm Mark Champion. I'm the communications manager for the Omaha Symphony. Thank you all for joining us here today, and thank you, Doug, for making the time to sit down and talk with us a little bit about your upcoming stage design collaboration extravaganza with the Omaha
It's
Symphony.
my pleasure. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Doug Fitch is a polymath artist whose work spans more disciplines and mediums than I can count personally. Furniture design, architecture, opera design, puppeteering, cooking. Is there anything else, Doug?
I don't know.
A
They're all
little bit of
kinds
everything.
of
The Omaha Symphony enlisted Doug's help to create a one-of-a-kind stage design for our upcoming concert, Don Juan and the Lark Ascending. Um, we can dive deeper into your specific plans later, but could you give the listeners a quick description of your installment at the Holland Center?
Sure. Well, it's a concert that's called Don Juan and the Lark Ascending, but actually the piece that we're doing is called Peter Grimes, is called the Sea Interludes of Peter Grimes, which is an opera which involves these pieces of music they were especially written to change the scenery. So there's a kind of a evocative, visualizable aspect to the music. It was written into it from its concept. So how to do that without the rest of the opera happening, and not really having any scenery to change. So we decided to create a number of large, sort of shimmery, slightly silvery, translucent banners hanging over the orchestra, which take light in a very sort of special way. And to bring in a lot of lighting and use that lighting to change the mood of these banners and create sunrises and moonlight and various different feelings that the music is evoking. So that's what we're doing. And then we have a number of very young ballet stars in the balcony running around operating different kinds of lighting instruments as well. So by hand, little LEDs that will create the impression of phosphorescent algae breaking upon the shores with waves and waving, as you were talking about earlier, waving these large pieces of foam core with foil on them to make wind and create a storm and a lot of other things that we're actually totally experimenting with.
That's amazing. I think this is going to be an absolutely mind-blowing thing to see with a full orchestra playing in front of it as well. Um, could you
It's
tell
really
us a little
great
bit?
music. Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
it's just really, really great music. I love this music.
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit more about how that kind of informed everything, but how did this collaboration come to be? It seems like it's kind of unique for sure.
Well, yeah, it is unique. It although it fits into a certain kind of world, I suppose. I've been working with a number of different conductors and artistic directors for symphony orchestras and the like, and chamber music ensembles and so, trying to reinvent the concert experience. If you look around, I think a lot of young people go to the concert. When they go to the concert, they look around and don't see anybody who looks like them at all. Um, as uh, as one conductor, Leonard Slatkin, once told me, well, here's the concert where the old people bring their grandparents. So I was like, yes. Uh, and one thing that you could easily see that differentiates the kinds of concerts that young people love to go to and the ones they do not want to go to is the fact that, for example, any self-respecting rock concert would never be done without lots of lighting. And any self-respecting classical music concert would never have any colorful lighting. So we're trying to bring these worlds to collide and see if we can invigorate what has become a kind of a unfortunately just it's a wonderful experience, but it's been stuck in its own tradition. Uh, and in order for people to feel like it's that they're seeing the right respectable thing, it has to look like that, but it doesn't. So it started by working in the Clarice Smith Center with a conductor named James Ross, and his conducting student was one of them was his name is John Devlin, and he runs the Wheeling Symphony Orchestra in West Virginia, and he was a young conducting fellow student at the time when I was invited to do a production of Petrushka, where everyone in the orchestra was not only playing their instruments, but when they were not playing their instruments, they were invited to puppeteer chickens or drink tea. And there was a couple of cameramen walking around inside the orchestra. And all of the things that these musicians were doing that was not playing music was projected immediately above the screen. And it told this whole visual story that seemed totally impossible because you were watching the symphony play in front of you as well. There were also 4 different puppeteers out in front, sort of operating the puppets. It's a story about puppets. So this John Devlin has grown up and he became a conductor, and he said, let's do something. And it ended up growing to involve the Omaha Symphony, and the Omaha Symphony has been really courageous and terrific about deciding we're going to just try this thing out. As I said before, it's rare to get a chance to be doing something that's really this experimental.
Yeah. I, as someone who really enjoys both the, rock concert experience and the classical experience, I'm really
Right.
excited to see that these things are coming together in Omaha. So it's
Yeah.
really exciting. Could you give us a little bit of background about your artistic career in general? I know it goes from all the way from working with Jim Henson and the Muppets to uh, everything in between.
Uh, yeah, I was by default just didn't know what else I was going to be doing, and I thought that I would be an artist, except I didn't know what that was exactly, and I never knew when I would be assured that I had become one. And, and there aren't very many clues except that you feel like you're doing something that feels like art, and then you decide that's what I'm doing. Um, I think it started when I was living in North Dakota as a child in the second grade, I guess. I found some magazine article that you could take these baby food jars. I had a little brother who was a baby at the time. Baby food jars, you could empty them, clean them, and then you could glue felt onto the glass, and you could make little characters and fill them with candy or something. And I made one for everyone in my class, and I felt like, wow, that was an amazing experience. That was, and then we set up there was a lot of stuff going on in Fargo, North Dakota. That was community theater and so forth. My father was involved. He was a professor of polymer chemistry, but he was also involved in the community theater as an actor. And he was doing King Lear with my older brother, who was all of 8 years old, I think, at that time. He went to some of these rehearsals. King Lear, 8-year-old. What is it like? He comes home and decides to write his own Shakespearean play. It's called Furious the King. And Furious the King happened in our basement. My mother made all the costumes and created curtains in the basement. And we put on a show, and we had to do it like 20 times because it was too popular. We charged 5 cents a person and gave out free Oreo cookies just in case they didn't like the show. And it was kind of an early turning point. It was like, this is fun. They should just keep doing this. And then when we moved to Connecticut, it turned out that there was the university there had a department of puppetry arts. And when I was 9, my mother decided that she was going to enroll her and hopefully me too into the puppetry department. And the guy who was in charge of it all, he seemed to think that that was totally fine. So as a 9-year-old, I went to my first college classes and how to make puppets. And we had so much fun doing this. Later that my family got involved and we started a puppet theater company that just kept going and going until we got all the way through high school. And then it turns out that you're supposed to go to college. It's expected. My mother said, well, you should bring a puppet to your interviews. I'm going like, well, that sounds crazy, but I guess you're right. So I brought a puppet to my interviews, and at the Harvard one, they seemed to like it very much. And I wasn't sure whether I got in to Harvard or the puppet did, but we both went. And very soon thereafter, I met my friend, colleague, Peter Sellers, the most amazing person out there in this whole field. He too had been a childhood puppeteer. So we got
Wow.
along well and started, and he promised that I would help him do the entire ring cycle in Denver, Colorado, in the streets that very summer, which we actually ended up doing.
Wow.
And that was sort of my introduction to the opera world. And then I
Mm.
realized that in the meantime, I was doing other things that all seemed related. I think the artist's job is basically kind of an impractical problem solver. You have problems that you need to solve, and you have to find practical solutions to maybe what are impractical problems, but they're important problems. It's not like the first responder problems, but they're kind of like a second responder problem to the soul of a zeitgeist or a time period. And that we are as artists, our job or responsibility is somehow to behave as if we're the barometers of a certain cultural moment and to give feedback on society at any given time. And it looks different depending upon what time it is. Whereas it might have looked like a Beaux-Arts painting in the 1860s. In France, it now looks a lot different, more about identity and more about shape shifting, and cultural identity, and all sorts of different kinds of things.
Yeah, that's I think one of the things that I find really fascinating about all of your work is that it's always very like thematically driven, and you just find any sort of way you can to kind of uh tell the story or communicate the themes that you're trying to do with whatever mediums you have. So how do you determine like which avenue you want to take with which story, and how do you kind of direct your creativity to uh, fully flesh out your creative vision, if that makes sense?
Well, I think you spoke about kind of the narrative. I think I'm driven by a couple of things. One is sort of the excitement of imagining a parallel universe to, under kind of world, people talk about world building or something like that.
Yeah.
And that is really, it's really interesting. And then I think, although I grew up in maybe a kind of a avant-garde idea that was sort of uh, very heavily guided by a brilliant Robert Wilson and various other artists of that time, when the notion of performance art was freeing up a lot of people from doing things the way they'd done before. Um, the One of the things that people talked about a lot was like a non-linear
Mm.
narrative or something like that. And I thought, oh, that's very cool. And maybe everything has to be non-narrative or whatever that's non-linear. But then one day I woke up and said, well, it's going to start at the show starts at 8 and it ends at 10. That's a timeline. No matter what you do, that's linear. It's going to start and end. So what you do between that linear timeline is up to you, but it's going to be linear, and the audience will make sense of it however they do. So you can help them or you can not help them.
Hmm.
uh, I love sort of doing a combination of both of these things. I think that the job of a theater maker is to create transformations that can stand in for the ones that you are maybe feeling like you're going through, or projecting yourself, or maybe offering chances to look at the life that we our the important moments of our life. How would we react if we had to be in a situation like this? Giving us tools to see how to deal with an emotional landscape that's always changing and challenging. So the narrative, the older I get, the more I realize how important just simple narrative is. Just a storytelling. It's what we believe in. And if you are on one side of the political fence or the other political fence, it's all about the storytelling. Who's got the best story? The one that makes the most sense to you. And I think that's particularly important in our time. And we have to become good at not only telling stories, but understanding that stories are being told to us
Hmm.
and how to listen to them and how to believe in them and how not to believe in them. And theater is not reality.
Hmm.
And reality is not really theater, but we are. finding ourselves getting them all jumbled up because we don't necessarily have a kind of newfound literacy to deal with the world that we're living in.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, how does that storytelling of say like an opera or something, um, how does the music and the this well rather how does the music of an opera influence how you want to tell the story on stage?
Well, the opera is particularly it's a specific and very particular art form. It's one of the it's gargantuan, it's impossible, and that's why it's exciting because it's just impossible. I mean, it very rarely works, and people love watching it. Really love watching it when it works out perfectly, and it's kind of like, oh my God, it's failing. That's sort of like a comedian falling on his face. It's oh dear, this is a terrible. But it's an exciting art form because it brings so many things together. It doesn't really come out of theater or music any more than it comes out of maybe the circus arts. Because in the world of circus, there's spectacle. And let's say that you are a master unicycle rider, and that's what you do, and you do it better than anybody else. So the circus wants you. And in the world of opera, you're a soprano and you do Mozart things. And so this particular opera wants you because you do this role. So, and you appear the first rehearsal knowing all of your lines, and that you are becoming an instrument for the director and the designers and so forth to create your 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 specific expertise, bring that to this particular version of the storytelling. So when I think about what the music does, I mean, it's easy to think about it from the perspective of a film, like in a Hollywood movie or something like that, where we forget about the music. It's just there, and
Yeah.
it's so important. If you watch a movie without the music, it's different. It's exciting too, actually. Like I like doing it on the airplane sometimes, to just sort of test what I'm getting from the images. But when you listen to that music without watching the film, it's can be very, very, very wonderful and exciting too. It's a different kind of music than like some regular symphonic music because it is narrative, because it has this very careful, is making a huge effort to tell you what you should be feeling, tell you what mood they're they're dealing with up there. If, for example, there's a totally ordinary conversation going on with no fear visualized between the characters, but the music underneath it is creating a tension. You know, there's something is going to happen. But if you have a different kind of music, which is merry and happy, then you're like, oh, they're fine. So in the opera world, it is music driven. So we as visual artists, we're secondary to the thing.
Mm.
And so it I like what I like about that is I like the problem solving aspect of it. That's part of the context. It's a given. I like knowing what the givens are because you
Mm.
read them together into your own personal constellation. And that's
Well
what.
said. Yeah, that is interesting because I was wondering if that is ever like a constraint for you, the like to have the story of the opera already, or if it's kind of a motivator.
Well, it's both.
Yeah, fair.
And I think I always when I was a lot younger, or when I was even younger, let's say, I remember thinking like a lot of friends were really wanted to do Shakespeare and things, and I go like, why do you want to do dead people's things? I don't understand. Why can't we do living people's things? And I have nothing against Shakespeare. He was brilliant and did great things, and we can all learn from that too. But it, it's not the only thing. And the only music is not like what was written by dead people too, it turns out. They did a lot of great things. But we tend to not want to listen to the music of our time unless it's pop music. And it's crazy. It's just a question of how we tell the story. All new music, we know this, all music was new once, and you have to listen to it with those kinds of ears. Um, but people are still a little bit, I don't know if I can sit through an hour and a half or even 20 minutes of something new. Uh, and so, well, just try it, you know.
Yeah.
Hate it. If you hate it, that's fine. It's just
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we love telling people to just come and try it at
yeah.
our concert hall. Um, Before we talk more about the Omaha Symphony concert in particular, I wanted to bring up a few pictures of some of your past
Oh,
work that
sure.
you had
Yeah.
sent and kind of have you break it down. So I am going to share my screen here. Um, all right. Can everybody see that?
Oh, that's a lot of destruction there. So
Um,
this
so
you're
take it
talking.
away. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, this is how do I even begin this? This is I am with Tommy Nguyen, who's a brilliant artist and happens to be my a life partner as well. He has come up with a story that needs to be told. It's about his mother, who was a boat person from Vietnam, uh, who never had any imagination of becoming an American citizen whatsoever, but just by default, and the Vietnam War, which the Vietnamese call the American War, by the way. Um, uh, so that's he wanted to tell a story about this extraordinary experience that these people go through, and I wanted to always do a puppet show with the tradition, the Vietnamese tradition. It's an ancient tradition called the water puppets of Vietnamese water puppets, which originated in the rice paddies. And these sort of magical dragons would rise up out of the water and move around and shoot fire and do crazy things, all operated by puppeteers behind a screen that you can't see. We decided to do this and got funded from the Jim Henson Foundation to do a workshop production. And this is one image of this workshop production. It starts out with uh, magnificent Mrs. Pham, and she's sitting in her little house near the rice paddies. And then little by little, it's only done with music. There are no words. Um, the village goes by. She gets excited about going to the night markets in the village. And then suddenly there's all these bombs and everything is just being destroyed. And all these little beautiful houses that are floating down the river are completely broken apart, and up above on the cliff, all the audience has been engaged in throwing airplanes down at the air, not really realizing that, in fact, this kind of suggests the complicity, which is, I like the notion that we remind audiences that uh, they're part of this experience, you know, always part of an experience. We wouldn't be doing live theater without an audience. Um, and then little by little, the pieces get put back together again. She finds her new home in Houston, Texas, which is another floodable city. So there's always about water, the rice paddies, the flooding, and we're working on this production. So it's not Shakespeare, and it's new, and it's it's all driven by music, but music that we get to you know, it's largely pop music.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, okay. How about this one?
Well, this was a really exciting project with the New York Philharmonic back in the first year that Alan Gilbert was the music director, and this is from an opera called Le Grand Macabre by Georgi Ligeti, Hungarian composer who wrote one opera only, and it is an amazing opera. It is about a fellow named calls himself Necrozar, who appears in a land called Bruegel land and meets the royal wine taster, who is always drunk, and tells him that it he has come here to warn everybody that the world will end that day by a meteor hitting the earth. And so we see this very strange, kind of surrealist world unfold. The music of Ligeti was made famous against his own better wishes by the movie 2001, when Stanley Kubrick at the last minute decided to use all sorts of music without permission, including Georgie Ligeti's music, a great piece called Atmospheres, which is done by orchestras all over the place now too.
Hmm.
But because what you're seeing now is the very end of the show, and I thought it would be fun to steal Stanley Kubrick's image of the baby and give it back to Ligeti. And
Wow. I didn't realize that, but that's really cool.
well, what else is going on stage is because if you're going to do a fully staged opera with the orchestra on stage instead of in the pit, there's not a whole lot of room.
Mm.
So I built a couple of miniature mechanical stages. My brother, Chris Fitch, a wonderful inventor and artist of mechanical things, he built these little miniature theaters in which we could live animate film. Everything that you see on the large screen was produced live in these little theaters by 4 puppeteers. So they're kind of in charge of building the world over there, and then all these actors on singer actors on stage there wearing costumes by the great Kathy Zuber too. So there you go. And you can see this production done, a really wonderful version of it. We did it just in 2019 at the Elbe Philharmonic in Hamburg, Germany. If you just YouTube Le Grand Macabre, Elbe Philharmonic, Elbe, ELB, that's all you need. And you can see the whole thing. It's really just like nothing else. It's weird and wonderful opera.
That's great. And just so everyone understands, the projections on that big screen there are all you're puppeteering things and a camera is capturing it and then projecting it onto the screen live, correct?
That's right. If I don't know how big your screen is, but you can see way over in the bottom right, there's that baby, which I
Oh
made
yeah, little
I made
teeny
out of
tiny bear.
silicone, is being held in the hands by a puppeteer, and
Oh
it's
my gosh.
projected onto the screen. The screen is oval and has all these spikes out of it because that is imitating what they call a monstrance in Catholic iconography, which takes something like the bone of a saint or something and the sacrament sancts it or makes it sacred. And but it's not only the monstrance; it also looks like a giant bursting sun, or in some cases, spider's eye, and in some cases, the meteorite. So it was a fun way of being able to use a screen that wasn't a typical rectangular projection screen.
Yeah, I love that. I got one more here.
All right, what is it?
This
Oh,
one.
hey, Eurydice. Oh, this is fun. We're doing all the contemporary. This is from an opera written by Matthew O'Coin, a young, brilliant composer, and based on, with the words from and the libretto by uh, brilliant playwright named Sarah Rule, who wrote a play called Eurydice, and then this was commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera and the Los Angeles Opera for Matthew to write a fully staged opera, which was gigantic. It had a chorus and everything. And after they did it at the Met, everyone kind of realized that nobody else is going to be able to do this thing. So Opera Grand Rapids, interestingly, got together with Boston Lyric Opera and commissioned a smaller orchestra version of it and a no chorus. So this is now the production gets to be done by all sorts of people. It's called Eurydice, and it's it's about the story of Orpheus, a story that has so far inspired, I think, 76 operas since since operas began with Monteverdi.
Wow.
Um, so that's pretty amazing already. It's a story about the greatest musician of all time, and so it's kind of fun to write music for that idea. And then how he, on his wedding day, loses his wife to a snake bite, and she disappears down to the underworld, uh, which is just too heartbreaking for Orpheus. So he manages to get down there and convince Hades to allow him to go and fetch his wife. And he only is able to do this under the circumstances that Hades, the rules are. You cannot you cannot speak to her. You can't look at her. And so you just have to rely on the fact that she trusts you. So you can imagine that this is a tough thing if she's saying, well, why aren't you looking at me? Is it really you? I mean, why do you want me to go all the way back up there and then I'll have to die again? And all of these amazing questions about human beings and men and women, and it's a fantastic series of things. And at the very last minute, she just calls his name and he spins around and loses her forever. Well, this opera called Eurydice, not called Orpheus, is from her perspective and is a contemporary version with a contemporary woman who's embodying the idea of Eurydice, and Orpheus is more of a metaphorical version of it. And she's going down to when she gets to the underworld, she meets her father, who died a while back and had been trying to deliver letters to her from the underworld. So it's a different take on it. And there are these singing stones, which you can see in the lower right-hand corner, who are very funny and kind of sort of mischievous and trying to, they're trying not to help anybody, but they kind of end up helping after all. They're supposed to not have any emotions, but they're crying and they're very funny. So it's a tragedy and it's a comedy, and I think it's a very moving opera, and we're going to be doing that in Grand Rapids. So if anybody in Omaha wants to come to Grand Rapids, it's in January 30th, 31st, and the 1st of February.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. I love these little stone people.
Yeah, they're so fun.
That's
Yes.
kind of, I want to start wearing stuff like that to work every day. Great. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. With all that in mind, now that we all kind of have an idea of what you like to do on stage, I kind of want to bring it back to the Omaha Symphony concert.
Good idea.
And tell me, what about the Omaha Symphony concert is going to be different or unique compared to some of your past projects that you've worked on?
Oh, it's a great question. I have done a couple of projects that have brought me and all of us to a point where we think this will work. And but the big challenge this time is that there really isn't any imagery. It's just lighting. And well, I will say there really isn't much imagery. I've decided to go full on with the idea of a concert of light and shadow. So I mean, I think that in this world of concert theater, sort of in between, maybe you see a lot of orchestras making a lot of money by doing something like the Star Wars, and then they turn the lights off, and then you get to watch Star Wars, and then the orchestra's playing underneath, and then you remember that the orchestra's playing once they turn the lights back on, and they stand up, and oh wow, they were there, so cool. Well, I want to try to do invent a concert experience where we don't forget about the orchestra, and that the imagery is compelling, or the visual stuff is compelling, but it's not overwhelming. And so if there's a balance, and so I'm trying to find that balance this time. So we've got a few mirror puppets that will be utilized to cast interesting shapes and some shadows and some wind. And yep, it's going to be, come and see what we're doing. Help us out.
Um, so that's a great segue into, I wanted to talk about something that you brought up in a past conversation, which was your inspiration from the Bauhaus and the Laszlo Maholi light
Yes,
space
that's
modulator.
for sure. Yeah.
I wanted to
Everybody knows
share.
about that, I'm sure. So, no? Okay.
I have a picture of it here
Oh, great. Oh,
for
wonderful.
everybody, hopefully. There we go.
Yes, you did
Uh,
indeed. What is that?
yeah. So tell us a little bit about this sculpture and how this is kind of something you drew inspiration from.
Okay, so I mean, the Bauhaus first of all, was one of these incredible moments just before a whole war broke out and destroyed everything that they'd been thinking about, and we had to remember it all later. But this is made by another, I guess, Hungarian, Laszlo Moholy-Nagy was his name, and he was really interested in trying to see if light could be used as a medium by itself for rather than sculpture, rather than painting, rather than drawing and so forth. Light, the ability to shape light was fairly new in the 20s, 30s. And they were realizing that if you bring red light and blue light and green light, that this would mix together and you'd get the full spectrum and things. And so what he did, which was so wonderful, is he made this mechanical object which turns and spins and balls are rolling around, and it's got the kind of permanent motion thing. And he didn't make it to make he didn't really make it in order to have a sculpture. He made it in order to create a film. And the film was only partially about looking at the sculpture, but it was mainly to be capturing the shadows that it was creating, the shadows and the imagery so it was really about bouncing light and making shadows and mixing the colors. So what we're doing in Omaha is with these huge banners that are hanging, they are translucent, so some light comes through each one of them, and then what doesn't come through is mixing differently on the next layer of banners and mixing differently on the third layers of banners. And we won't know what it's like until we actually try it out, really.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a once in a lifetime opportunity. I think
I
this
hope
will
it's
be
not once in a lifetime. At least this is the first time.
well, yeah. Um,
Hope we
that's
get to do it
that's a
more.
great explanation. What kind of impact do you hope to make with this project? What do you think the audience is going to take away from it?
It's just simple. It's just like you just want to do something that makes people go out of the theater that they chose to go into and have an experience and go out with a really great feeling that it was worth it. And it, like, do you remember that? It was so different and fun. And is it really, do we have to do the concert do next time I go to a concert, does it have to just be, the same thing again? And maybe we can, stick a little wedge in there and move the needle a little bit and blend what's great about heavy metal and Shostakovich and see, or I think when you just can't imagine that like Beethoven would be upset if they put colored lights on the stage when they were playing his music. I just he couldn't hear it anyway. He would probably this is great.
Yeah, if
So,
anyone would appreciate it, he probably
it's
would.
it's just the whole I think the question of all this stuff. Wagner invented a marvelous, terribly German sounding and sophisticated word for us, which is the Gesamtkunstwerk, right? Which means the bringing together of all the art forms to tell a single story. So, and this notion of when you are working with a lighting artist designer, with a costume designer who's envisioning what the human population will be looking like and feeling like, when you are bringing in the scenery designer, which is creating a world around them, and it's of course it's all fantastic and it's not real or anything like this, but with the imagination of the audience, which is a necessity, that the most important part of the whole thing, that imagination is used to connect these things in a different way for each person who's in the audience, right? So everyone comes in with something and goes out with a different feeling. And that Gesamtkunstwerk, if we take those notions and it's called a total work of art, I think that there's it just we need to bring these elements together in different ways all the time. So this I just keep going back to the notion of a concert experience and maybe concert theater or something like that. But I like to think of tradition, the notion of tradition, as something that what is a tradition? A tradition is something that happened once and then another time. And the third time, it's tradition. So why, why do we have to do traditions? Why don't we start inventing them?
Yeah, great point. I'm excited, like you said, hopefully this one is a tradition and everyone
I
can
hope
get it
so.
multiple times. Um, well, to wrap it up here, I wanted to ask, what kind of advice would you give to the designers and artists who may be listening now,
Yeah.
who want to be as active and creative and thoughtful as you are with your projects?
What would I say to them?
Yeah, how would you help them to kind of activate their creativity?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm sure that if they're already interested in doing this sort of thing, already their creativity is probably already very activated. And
Fair.
so I wouldn't need to worry about that. I think the bigger problems are how the whole world is changing. And what we thought of was a good idea is maybe not such a good idea anymore. Meaning, um, I'm confronted when I teach when I go in and pop in at various different universities to work with scenic designers and stuff like that. I didn't ever even think about doing this before about 10 or 15 years ago, but then I suddenly started like, what happens when the show comes down? What happens when you see all of your show in the dumpster? How does that feel? And I used to go dumpster diving for materials, I still do. But I think like it's really tragic when you think of that it's not recyclable. An opera is not recyclable, really. Unless you've designed it with the intention of doing it. So that's one new thing. But another new thing is that all the elements that I was talking about before, this sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, is like, well, the lighting is actually merging with the scenic design via the medium of video. So, am I a set designer? Am I a lighting designer? Or am I a projection designer? Or are you know, are and you can project onto people's bodies. So is that the costume design? Everything is kind of mixed up in a new way. And that's really exciting. I think what I would say is it's always good to look at what people have done before, and you can never get enough of it by just going to look at, you know, uh, cave drawings. I mean, they'll be inspiring. But then I think what I always derive most of my inspiration from is, of course, everything that I've personally known, done, and so, but really just finding out what the specifics are, what the givens are, once again, of any situation. I'm not very interested in kind of making up something every day for my own sake. It's more like, I think if I had my druthers, they would say I would probably just have dinner parties or something like that. But you get a job and people say, "Can you come and do something for us?" Then you go like, "Well, what is it? And is what sort of shape should it take? Is it durational? Is it solid? Is it move? Is it a mobile unit? Is it spin should people be involved? Should they be walking, dancing, singing? What? That first of all the thing, but then you go like, how big is the space? How do what? Who's working on it with me? And then it starts to become. It starts to create a shape of its own that seems to be, bespoke for that special situation. And I think I don't know how to work any other way. That's the way I've always done everything. I think a lot of design programs have the idea or maybe the illusion that it should all be coming from you, and you should tell
Mm.
people what you want. And I think finding out what you kind of collectively need is well, it's just the approach that I've always taken.
Yeah. Hmm. That's interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it that way. So, thank you.
Well, you're very welcome.
I think that's about all the time we have. So, thank you again for sitting down and chatting with me.
My pleasure. Yeah. I feel like I'm in sort of a Star Trek situation here in the airport. This little
Hey,
lounge.
might as well be. That's pretty cool. Is there anything else you think our audience should know about this concert coming up on October 25th and 26th?
Well, they should know that this is happening. That's true.
Yeah.
That's good. Um, I think they should know that. Um, uh, yeah, as I think I already said it, but if they thought they were going to be coming to or if they have any concerns about coming to another concert, mom, dad, whatever, like, uh, or if you're a parent and you say, no, you should really come to this. Like, why? Well, because it's different and because it's going to be something you won't see, at least for the rest of the year in Omaha. So,
Yeah.
and it's not an opera. And so you don't have to worry about not knowing something. There are no super titles, and whatever you think is happening, that's what's happening. So that's
Well
what
said.
I think.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a definite can't miss Omaha Symphony
Oh, well, I
concerts.
hope so.
Looking
I'm really enjoying working with the Omaha Symphony. There, you guys are great. So, and
great.
everybody should know that too. So,
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Doug. We're all very excited and
looking forward. I'll be there
yeah,
next week.
sounds good. We'll see you
All right.
soon then.
Bye bye.
Thanks.